Make sure you guys hit the subscribe button if you guys are enjoying the content that we're throwing up. And make sure you guys hit the like button if you enjoy the video. And yeah, let's begin. What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and before we start this video, I want to pop a question to you guys. Will you marry me? I do want to ask you all a question, though. I had a fan send me a message on, I think, an email or on Discord telling me that, like, they basically put my videos on to help their baby fall asleep, right? They have, like, a little baby kid, and they, my videos help them fall asleep because my voice is so relaxing. And so I asked people on Twitter, I said, if I had a channel where I read you guys bedtime stories, would you watch it, right? Because I'm considering just, like, repurposing one of the older channels that I have that I don't use, because I don't want to have, like, 15 channels running around, right? So I figured, if people were interested in it, I would, like, repurpose a channel for that, right? And then just like read you guys bedtime stories. Would you guys watch that or listen to it? Rather, like, would you guys dig something like that? I feel like people would say yes. I don't really know. But what I want to do in this video, and really what I want to do this week, is I want to essentially create a big event in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, right? Now, something on par with like Avengers Infinity War and Avengers Endgame. Now, spoiler alert, the event that we're going to be creating here is going to be Secret Wars. And so what we're going to do is we're going to run a series of movies that are going to do exactly what the first 10 years of the MCU did and start breaking things down. Now, one big caveat to understand here is there's two things the MCU has come out and said, right? Feige and company have come out and said two big things. The first is they're not going to do what they did before, which is a phase of movies and then Avengers, and then like another phase of movies and then like Avengers 2 and then Avengers 3 and so on. They're not going to do that, right? Instead, everything's going to be broken down into like 5 phases or so. And some of these may have like a big event and some of them may not. We don't know exactly what form it's going to take. That's really all they've given us. And so because of that, because we're looking at anywhere between 3 to 5 year long arcs, I've basically scaled this accordingly, right? And I've also kind of scaled down the amount of movies that we're going to be getting too, just because of the fact that Marvel, as far as I'm aware, is focusing both on movies and on TV shows now, right? So that kind of takes away half the attention. The other part of this is that Feige and them said it's going to be at least 5 years before we see the X-Men or any of the X-Men related properties in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, largely because it looks like they've got other things that they were working on before they got to this point. So I'm also taking that into account. And so what we're going to do here is we're going to initially kind of open up with some of the movies that have already been slated, right? So we have Black Widow, The Eternals, Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, Spider-Man 3, Thor 4, Doctor Strange 2, Black Panther 2, and Captain Marvel 2. Only a few of these movies we're actually going to focus on, and it's because things like the Black Widow movie are flashbacks. It's going to be a flashback film. We know she's dead after the events of Avengers Endgame, like she cannot come back. I guess maybe they can barter her soul if they travel to the realm of Mistress Death. We don't really know if that's an option, but it looks like Scarlett Johansson is just out forevermore with regards to the Marvel Cinematic Universe movies. With something like Shang-Chi and the Ten Rings, no clue what they're going to do with that, right? Shang-Chi was always only really ever at best a street level character. That doesn't mean it's bad. It just means who knows what they're going to do here. And really the uncertainty with what could be done with this film is actually what makes me even more excited for it. Spider-Man 3, we don't really know what form this is going to take because we don't know what the future of Spider-Man in Marvel Cinematic Universe is going to be. I do have a big plan that's very similar to this in terms of what to do with Spider-Man if he reverts back to Sony, so that Sony can create a series of films that will essentially be their own version of like Infinity War and Avengers Endgame, and that I think they would really have a lot to contribute to the Sony landscape, right? And so what this does is it basically brings us into really kind of lets us go back to the Eternals, right? So talking about the Eternals for a second, by whatever manner and whatever means, I don't know exactly how this movie is going to unfold. We're going to have Cersei, right? We're going to have Icarus, we're going to have those characters, but I think the big takeaway from this needs to be that one, it's going to set the ground level for how mutants come into the MCU, and two, it'll give us some bookended origin on Thanos. Not that it matters because Thanos has been defeated, but it would still be a nice little tribute in a way to basically have a film that kind of ties back into the last 10 years that we've experienced. Now, for those of you guys who don't know, the basis behind the origin of mutants is that in the early days of mankind, you basically had the missing link, right? They were called the Wanderers, the gap between primate man and modern man. And the Wanderers were met by Gaia, who was the sentience of Earth, basically Mother Earth. I doubt they do that in the Eternals movie, but essentially she basically guided them towards Celestials. And the Celestials ended up taking the Wanderers and splitting them into thirds. The first third had their genes modified so they would basically become perfect in nature, right? They would be angelic in terms of their appearance. They'd be able to tap into cosmic energy. They basically went forward as the Eternals. The job of the Eternals was to safeguard baseline humanity. Now, the second group had their genes destabilized. And the idea behind having their genes destabilized was to simply just create rampant, unchecked mutations with no real indication of how they would unfold, right? That group became the Deviants, and the Deviants largely resided underground for a time. And then the third group had their genes genes modified in such a way so that they would begin the process of mutating at some future point in time. Now, how these mutations would end up manifesting, we weren't really given a timetable for. It was just somewhere along the line they're going to manifest. And in truth, it was actually the Celestials looking for a particular end result. And that end result actually came in the form of Franklin Richards. But the fact remains here that that third group, the genes that were modified so that they would start activating at some point in time, that's where your mutants come from. Now, in terms of the overall role of the Eternals, just to kind of give you guys a little bit of a perspective here, the Eternals were designed for safeguarding humanity, to make sure that they were basically shepherds for humanity who were perceived to be sheep, right? Not really literally, but metaphorically. What ended up happening here is that the Eternals abandoned their duties. They abandoned their posts, and this led the deviants to enslaving humanity. Now, the Celestials returned during what was called the second host, and they realized the Eternals had vacated their role. And so they punished the deviants by basically wiping out pretty much all of them, pushing them to the brink of extinction in what was called the Great Cataclysm. And that led to the sinking of Atlantis, right? So initially, the deviant capital city was called Lumeria. And so with Atlantis sinking underwater, the deviants were basically forced to reside underground. And then the Eternals were tasked with basically safeguarding humanity or keeping an eye on humanity and doing what they were supposed to do. Now, the reason why this sort of bookends into the origin of Thanos is because what you also had leading up to and around that time is you had some Eternals who actually left Earth and they took up residence on Saturn's moon Titan. And so where there ended up being a civil war among those Titanian Eternals, that there was only one woman left named Suisan, right? She ended up basically being the sole survivor. And so when there was a second exodus of Eternals, some of those who were led by not Highfather, who were led by I can't remember what his name was. It's like Father or something like that. Anyway, who were led by that guy, he ended up marrying Suisan, and they had a couple of kids. They had Star Fox, and then they also had Thanos, right? Or Eros and Thanos, so that's what you want to call him. So, Thanos is basically is rooted in humanity, right? Like his genes can be traced back to essentially the missing link between humans and mutants. So, there's an argument there to basically say Thanos is essentially an Earthborn being, right? He can trace his heritage back to that point. But nonetheless, okay, so jumping past that, that's really the big takeaway, right? Eternals is going to lay the foundation and say this is where mutants come from, right? Now, skipping over Shang-Chi, skipping over Spider-Man 3, jumping to Thor 4, this is really probably just going to be another one of those buddy cop kind of movies that falls in line with Thor Ragnarok, as well as the events of Guardians of the Galaxy 2. We know that Jane Foster is supposed to get the hammer, right? We know that kind of thing is supposed to happen. What I'm also hoping here is this introduces Adam Warlock. Instead of having a situation like you saw in Marvel Comics when Adam Warlock first emerged from his cocoon for the very first time and then tried to take Sif as his bride, instead he tries to take Jane Foster, and this basically leads to Thor intervening in order to save Jane Foster from Adam Warlock or something along those lines. It's kind of far-fetched because we don't really have any reason to believe that Adam Warlock would be knowledgeable about Earth or have any interest in Earth, and so at that point we can just kind of throw in whatever explanation we want to in order to make that work, right? It could be that like Thor and the Guardians of the Galaxy are off in space, and basically Adam Warlock emerged as a result of Thanos blinking out half the life in the universe. It was essentially the race that created him. I can't remember their names, but they basically, the Sovereign, they basically panicked, right? When half their race got wiped out, they're like, oh my God, it's some crazy threat. We have to release Adam so we can defeat this threat. And then they hit the big red button and the cocoon opened up, and then Adam Warlock's been here ever since. We can throw in whatever explanation that we want to, but basically that's where you would see Adam Warlock introduced. Now, in terms of building up to Secret Wars, this comes with Doctor Strange 2. The idea behind Doctor Strange 2, the Multiverse of Madness, is this is most likely going to see the introduction of a villain like Nightmare, or possibly even Dormammu having a bigger role, but we know that Doctor Strange and the Scarlet Witch are going to be a part of it. Now, we'll probably end up seeing alternate realities that are out there somewhere. Some may be references to films that we've seen before, back when Fox owned the X-Men and the Fantastic Four and all that, back when, Sony, when Spider-Man was part of Sony. So it'd be a fun little Easter egg to see like Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man in some universe somewhere. But regardless of what goes down, this will likely focus on the Scarlet Witch learning how to use her powers, learning that she can warp reality, that she's far more powerful than she believes she is. But the big takeaway from this is that the Beyonder becomes aware of them, because by some manner, either they get lost or whatever the case is, they end up outside the multiverse, and the Beyonder basically sees them, and when they're there for a moment, like, okay, we don't know where we are, and basically end up snapping back, the Beyonder becomes aware that there's life outside of itself, right? So for those of you guys who don't know what this means, in Marvel Comics, you have the Beyonder, who's literally called that because he hails from a realm called the Beyondverse. Now, there's two different iterations. There's the Beyonder as he originally appeared in Secret Wars 1984, then there's the Beyonder as he was referenced during Jonathan Hickman's Avengers and New Avengers. We're gonna kind of go with the original stuff. We're gonna take a little bit of Hickman's Avengers and New Avengers and kind of throw some of those concepts in, but for the most part, we're sticking largely with the Beyonder. And the way this worked in Marvel was that in the original Secret Wars event, a kind of cataclysm took place that basically led to a sort of pinhole tear in the fabric of the multiverse, and it allowed the Beyonder from the Beyondverse, this space that makes the multiverse look absolutely tiny, right? Which is kind of weird. I don't know how you make an infinitely expansive space look small, but nonetheless, the Beyonder basically realized the Marvel multiverse was there, and the Beyonder started looking in and became curious on like the nature of good and evil. And this led to the Beyonder entering the main Marvel universe, and then that's how we got Secret Wars, right? So we would basically take that concept and we would say that Doctor Strange and Scarlet Witch traveling the multiverse, somehow ending up outside of it in what amounts to a 5 to 10 minute long scene, was enough for the Beyonder to become aware of their existence and then essentially follow them back, and then became curious about everything that exists inside the entirety of the Marvel multiverse, right? So from there, go into Black Panther 2. And Black Panther 2, I would make this movie Doom War, basically, is what it would be. And the reason why is because it's a great way to introduce the character of Doctor Doom. Now, we don't need a great big huge amount of exposition. We can get it. We can get this kind of origin of Doctor Doom, or we can at least come to the understanding that he leads Latveria. And you can introduce Latveria in any number of ways, right? You could say that Latveria was part of the Eastern Bloc of Communist Russia, and that when the Soviet Union fell at the end of the Cold War, that Latveria was any number of other countries who were basically just liberated from the yoke of oppression and communism, and were basically told, here you go, you're free. Good luck. Try to make it work. And this led to Doctor Doom basically seizing control. Now, we end up seeing things like Doctor Doom is not a dictator. He's not cruel, that he loves his people and he'll do whatever it takes to protect them. But regardless of the circumstance, Doctor Doom becomes aware of vibranium in Wakanda, and he becomes aware of the fact that vibranium has the ability to amplify magical energy. And so in response to this, Doctor Doom basically ends up orchestrating a coup d'etat in the country of Wakanda, which basically allows individuals who are kind of remnants from the era of Eric Killmonger, right? When Eric Killmonger popped up and said, I'm the rightful heir to the throne, that there's fallout from Black Panther killing him, right? There are still people who were loyal to Eric Killmonger, or who never saw Black Panther as an adequate king, who wanted to return to the ways of old, and that this is their opportunity to do that, right? Doctor Doom's like, where Eric Killmonger failed, I can succeed. I will put you guys in power. You can get Black Panther out, and they successfully do, right? But in the process, much like in the comics, T'Challa is injured, and he has to pass the mantle of Black Panther to his sister, and so Shuri becomes the new Black Panther. And then it just kind of proceeds however in the heck it proceeds after that, right? Whatever it ends up taking place, right? The long and short of it is that Black Panther, T'Challa, as a superhero that we know, for a time is not truly Black Panther. Maybe he gets those abilities back, right? And him getting those abilities back is actually pretty important for what we end up doing later on down the line in a different video. But what we end up doing here is we basically kind of skim over Captain Marvel 2. That movie will be whatever that movie is, right? Maybe it introduces Spectrum, Monica Rambeau, don't really know. But at that point, we jump into new material. We jump into new faces. And what we do here is we pick up with Excalibur. Now, Excalibur is basically Britain's superhero team, and they've been around for quite some time. And in fact, Excalibur, as far as I'm aware, was actually the answer, or at least, well, as in the way that we're going to do it in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Excalibur is going to be the answer to the disbanded Avengers team, right? The fact that the Avengers team doesn't really exist anymore in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, right? Like Captain America's retired, Iron Man's dead, Hawkeye is basically spending time with his family, Black Widow's dead, Incredible Hulk's doing whatever he's doing, Thor's out in space, so there really is no more Avengers team, right? The party's over and everybody's gone home. But in response to that, you basically have Britain that kind of looks around and says, okay, but like if there's no Avengers team to protect the world, then who's going to protect us? Well, we have to be able to protect ourselves. This leads to the introduction of Excalibur. Now, the first bit of this, and this is where things get pretty important here, the first bit of this is focusing on Captain Britain, right? Brian Braddock becoming Captain Britain. It doesn't need to be super long, right? Half an hour, something along those lines. But when he selects the Amulet of Right, basically the artifact that gives him his powers, he's taken and basically shown the Captain Britain core, that in the entirety of the multiverse, that there's one Captain Britain in each universe, and that Captain Britain is designed to try to safeguard the universe as best he can, which is a tall order, because Captain Britain can't really do anything but fly and like punch really hard and run fast. He's a Captain America that's like twice as strong, and so he's really not that great of a hero, and certainly completely ill-equipped to protect the universe from any real measurable threat that could be a danger to the universe. But what this does is while he's doing his quote-unquote tour of the Captain Britain Corps, right? Like while he's being shown around or whatever the case is, in the background, we start hearing things like Captain Britain's, the Captain Britain of this universe has been destroyed. The Captain Britain of that universe has been destroyed. Their universes have been totally wiped out. There's basically pandemonium and panic going on out there in the multiverse. We don't really know what it is right now. The thing here is this is basically building up to the Beyonder, that after the Beyonder followed Doctor Strange and company into the multiverse, he started getting curious. And we'll get kind of a full exposition of what's going on with regards to what the Beyonder's been doing, but the Beyonder kind of got curious, and by virtue of his actions has led to the destruction of these different universes. It wasn't as if those versions of Captain Britain actively fought against the Beyonder, it was simply that they were destroyed along with their universe. Maybe some of them were destroyed in battle when they tried to face the Beyonder, maybe other superheroes became aware of the Beyonder. We'll explain how all that works once we get to the actual Secret Wars film. But following this, what we do is we switch over over to Alpha Flight. And what Alpha Flight does is it introduces basically this team that's government sanctioned, right? It's just like Britain and their Excalibur. Canada has a team to protect its own interests. But the difference here is that unlike in the comics where Alpha Flight was always basically a government sanctioned team, what we throw in here is the idea that at some point in the past, Alpha Flight was a ragtag team, right? They were just operating on a shoestring budget. They weren't government sanctioned. They were just people who took up arms to basically protect their country as best they could. But they were just kind of small, fighting these small little skirmishes. They never really fought any major threats, or anything like that, which is why we've never heard of them. But the reason why this matters and the big takeaway from this is what you say is that at the point when they were a ragtag team, Wolverine was part of Alpha Flight, because in the comics he was. You basically say that Wolverine served alongside Alpha Flight. It doesn't have to be a great big huge moment. Maybe it's just kind of like where they're walking through their office or something like that, whatever it is, and they've got their room where they've got memorabilia from days gone by, and they've got a group picture, and in that group picture is Wolverine in his Wolverine outfit. But this sets the stage for that. It sets the stage for the introduction of Wolverine. And so following this, in the last movie that we're going to talk about in this video, we get into Blue Marvel. And Blue Marvel, I feel like, is a character who is long overdue in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. He really deserves a movie, right? But this movie, much like the Black Widow film, is done as a flashback film, in the sense that what we end up doing is basically getting the origin by Kevin Grievous for Blue Marvel. We make a few changes here and there to try to make it fit into continuity, but you basically end up saying that, like in the 1960s, that Adam Brashear was a superhero, right? He was a guy who saved the world from multiple threats, from asteroids and alien invasions and all that kind of stuff, and in the midst of the civil rights movement, the country was already chaotic, but the Blue Marvel was a hero that everybody could effectively rally around. And this was all copacetic until he fought his arch nemesis, a guy by the name of Connor Sims, also known as Ant-Man. And where Blue Marvel did prove to be successful, his mask was torn and you end up finding out he's a black man. And the black community basically says, well, because you're black, you have to ally yourself with us. The white community and the federal government panics and says, if he does that, there'll be nothing we can do to stop him. And so much like what you saw in the comic, President Kennedy ends up calling in Blue Marvel into the Oval Office. He asks him to step down in the interest of national security. Blue Marvel does that and receives the Presidential Medal of Freedom, which he ends up throwing away. Basically, like, you end up getting that whole origin story. If you guys never read The Legend of Blue Marvel, you'll find a link to it down in the description. It's probably one of the single greatest comic book stories written in the modern era. It is amazing. But basically, you bring in Adam Brashear, you get this flashback film, and you end the film in such a way to where people are wondering, where's Blue Marvel now? What's he doing now? And maybe you show some post-credit scene to show the audience, hey, he's still around, right? Like, he's still around here somewhere, whatever the case is. And that's why I say you can update it, you can change it, right? Like, you can respond to it in different ways. You can say, okay, well, instead of the civil rights era of the 1960s, maybe it's some kind of other, civil rights unrest. So like the LA riots of 1992 and the president using the Insurrection Act of 1807 in order to send in national troops. I think that using the civil rights movement is more impactful. I just don't really know how you justify a guy who was in his 30s, during the era of the civil rights and is only aged by like, 20 years or 15 years. You could just tie it into his powers and just say because of the nature of his powers, he's basically ageless, right? Like, he's not really immortal, but he's like Wolverine. He just ages at a really slow rate, and that would work perfect. But again, these are just some ideas that I have, right? So if you guys enjoy this, if you guys want me to cover the next films that we're doing, because in the next video, we'll do 4 more films. And then in the video after that, we'll do 5 films, which includes Secret War. So it's only this is only 3 videos long, but let me know if you guys want to see the other ones, right? And I'm kind of curious. Let me know what you guys think about this. If you guys have any kind of constructive criticism on things that you would change, let me know down in the comment section. But if you guys are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace.